when President Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act of 1935. The system was set up where 40 workers contributed into the trust fund and only one person receives a check from the Social Security Administration. Prior to the 20th century, families had many children to help support the farming communities across the land. At the turn of the century, traditional family demographics started to change where more parents worked at the factories or companies versus rural farm life. In the 1950s, this resulted in families having fewer children, which translated approximately 16-to-1 ratio of workers to retirees. Today in 2007, the ratio has shrunk to 3-to-1. Somewhere in the year 2017, the ratio is expected to shrink 2-to-1. Congress had been compensating the shrinking ratio by increasing the payroll tax, that is the OASDI contributions from your check. In 1935, President FDR set up the system by having workers contributing 1% of their paycheck while their employer provided the other 1%, totaling 2%. Today total contribution is 14.4% with maximum of $97,500 per year. The monies go to Congress where it is distributed to the Social Security Administration for accounting purposes to save money called the trust fund. And of course, retirees receive their monthly payment from the Social Security Administration. We tend to think that the money saved into the trust fund is like a bank until it is needed for future retirees. Collecting their monthly payments is promised by a social contract between the people and the government. Generally speaking, the system worked. There was enough money collected by the worker contributions to provide some financial security to the people who retired with little or no pension or savings. This helped many people from living in poverty. In 1965, President LBJ changed the accounting methodology. The general budget and the Social Security Trust Fund were merged, what was called a unified budget. This accounting method was used to simplify the budgeting process to support major programs such as the Great Society, Vietnam War, and going to the moon. Then President Clinton changed the account method again in 1990 by making the trust fund as off-budget. Whether the trust fund is in the unified budget, off-budget or on-budget, the accounting practices employed by the Social Security Administration never changed. Now let's examine how the system really works. Again, workers and employers make their contributions to the Social Security system. The money flows through Congress where the money is accounted and distributed to the retirees by the Social Security Administration. The remaining money that was not distributed to the retirees is saved into the trust fund. The trust fund is really a collection of IOU. That is, the money is converted into equivalent of U.S. Treasury bills. It's essentially the same thing when we buy our U.S. saving bonds. Once the money is converted to IOU, Congress proceeds and spends the money originally earmarked for Social Security's savings into their favorite pet projects. This include various pork bills, social programs, military, and everything else. Whenever there is a shortfall of money collected by workers and employers contributing into the system, the Social Security Administration cashes IOU to cover their expenses in paying the retirees. This in turn authorizes Congress to either raise taxes and/or cut other programs to cover the shortfall. The hard reality is the money saved into the trust fund is already spent, since the IOU are masquerading like U.S. saving bonds. When you buy savings bonds, you are essentially loaning the government to spend your money for their programs and promise to pay back your money including interest. Here is a dirty little secret. The gain you make in the interest factored with inflation and taxes imposed on your savings bonds gains are wiped out. In effect, you made no money and the government received a no-interest loan. Cool trick? Just look at how much you spend on the same thing over time. Food, gasoline, phone, electricity, water, gas, rent, insurance, etc. It slowly increases over time. That tends to wipe out any gain you made through interest and, of course, paying taxes on the interest you made on your Treasury savings bonds. So here is the real problem. Eventually, Social Security will be cashing in the IOU that represent the trust fund. Congress has spent the money representing the IOU on government programs. Since there is no real money saved in the trust fund, Congress will be forced to either raise taxes and/or cut back on government programs. What most likely to happen is that Congress will continue to raise taxes until we go bankrupt. That is why President Bush wants to convert Social Security into private account to avoid this future crisis, and restrict the ability of Congress to spend trust fund earmarked for their favorite government programs. This includes both Democrats and Republicans. The primary problem in converting Social Security into a private account is the amount of IOU debt has been accumulated. Over $2 trillion. Now that is one big pile of cash. And we are not talking about the other $3 trillion of general public debt our elected officials have gotten us into. But we have only ourselves to blame since we have voted these politicians into public office. And our politicians are returning the favor of special interest to us in the form of social programs, grants, military expenditures in our state, and zillion of other programs. We asked for it, and we got it. Let's take a look at several graphs to get a better picture of the problems facing Social Security. Let's revisit the primary reason why Social Security will encounter problems in the future by looking at the population. This shows a direct consequence of families having fewer and fewer children, which translates a change of the demographics. Again in 1950, there were 16 to 1 workers contributing to the system per 1 retire collecting Social Security benefits. Here, you can see an increase of baby boomers going into retirement around 2020, whereas number of workers do not increase, hence, eventually creating a 2 to 1 ratio of workers to retirees. This will force Congress to increase the payroll taxes, which in turn will put more pressure on the middle and lower class ability to put food on the table, buying clothes, paying rent and other expenses such as transportation and education. This shows the cause and effect between inflation and the gross national product of the benefit increases to the retirees versus working people's wage increases who pay into the system. This is very important to ensure that enough money is flowing into the system to help pay the retirees versus cashing the IOU from the trust fund. Secondly, the government wants to ensure that the workers paying into the system can afford it to support the retirees. The government encourages the Federal Reserve System to print out more and more money to provide the necessary revenue to pay the retirees and in turn allow the workers receive higher and higher wages to keep the system afloat. However, the primary result is inflation eating away everybody's savings and their purchasing power. In the beginning of Social Security, the money contributed to the system has been slowly increasing over the course of the decades. However, in the early 70s there were concerns of the system failing when the baby boomers started to retire in the early 21st century. There was a major change in 1983 by President Ronald Reagan to help shore up the system. Hence, the money being received, saved and spent have started to increase significantly. More importantly, the outlay of benefits paid to the people who were receiving Social Security remain less than the monies contributed by the workers contributing to the system. So, the cumulative total savings started to increase dramatically. You can see a drop in the savings after Clinton tax increase in the early 90s. This illustrates saving monies into the trust fund versus paying benefits to the retirees is tightly coupled on the health of the economy. Again, we see the amount of money saved into the trust fund. Here we can see saving increases dramatically starting in 1983 when Congress and President Ronald Reagan made changes into the Social Security system. The most important factor is that the money collected for the trust fund stays larger than the IOU used for expenditures by the government. In the future, the IOU will be cashed in to help pay the benefits for our retirees, which in turn will force Congress to either raise payroll taxes or reduce benefits to the retirees or cut other government programs or some combination of therein.